as Jason and I discuss Darien Richmond's arrest during this podcast, there will be video and audio clips included, which may be sensitive.
Included in these clips are strong language and videos of arrests. Hello, and welcome to the very first episode of the Follow-Up Podcast. This is a podcast run by the Johnson County Community College Student News Team. I'm Jason Yearout, a staff reporter.
And I'm Mena Haas. I'm the staff photographer.
I've been saying your last name wrong for so long.
It's okay.
I've been saying Hayes. Our very first episode is on the Darien Richmond trial. And so let's start out with a brief kind of introduction to how we became aware of this trial. So, Mena, I think you were aware of it before I was.
Yes, so I found out about Darien's case through my editor, Grayson, who brought it to my attention back in August. And I decided that it would be a great story to cover considering all of the things going on with the Black Lives Matter movement currently. So I brought it to the Ledger and I thought we would cover it. So here we are.
Mm-hmm. And then what we're referring to specifically is the March for Darien Richmond, which took place on August 21st. So on August 19th, the writers for the Campus Ledger received a message from Grayson, our editor-in-chief, that this rally was happening, and our editor-in-chief could not make it, and so she wanted to know if we could. And I said, yes. When I first heard the phrase, like, Justice for Darien March, I thought Darien had been shot by police. That was my first response, and then finding out about this, I did some more research in the 2 days prior to the protest. I think Mena deserves more credit for the official written article because I was doing my best. I didn't have a ton of information. Mena was there, like, with a source, knew what was up, knew what was going on.
I don't know if I would say that, but I will say we were both very interested in covering it, and we thought it would be an important issue to bring up, considering that we do live in the Overland Park area, and, you know, we don't see these kinds of things happening all the time, but they are, even when we don't see them. So I think that Jason and I really did want to take the time to cover this because we knew there was more to the story that needed to be said.
Yeah, I do try to stay informed about what's going on locally, but I don't know if you guys have noticed, but things are a little chaotic right now.
Yes.
And so it's very easy, like if you're not paying attention the day that something happens, then you might just not hear about it.
Right.
And so the reason for this podcast was because we reported on the rally for Darien, which was August 21st, but in that article, we had not spent very much time focusing on the circumstances of Darien's arrest, which, having looked into it now, I feel like deserve an hour-long podcast because there's a lot going on. Let's move on to the events of July 24th. That was the night that Darien was arrested. On July 24th, the Miller Dream LLC, which is a social activism group, had a protest supporting the Black Lives Matter movement. Marissa Richmond, as well as 2 other protesters, were arrested for marching in the street, which is a violation of an Overland Park City ordinance. As she was being handcuffed, Marissa called out to her husband, Darrien Richmond, who ran up to the arresting officers and was taken into custody. It's unclear if he made contact with them. We can't really tell from the videos that clearly. Darien is now being tried for battery of a law enforcement officer. Battery of a law enforcement officer is any unlawful touching of law enforcement. The entire circumstances surrounding Darien's arrest, as well as the other protesters arrested, have been controversial to say the least. Following the arrest, the Overland Park Police Department released this statement. This was posted July 27th, 3 days after the march. Friday night, Overland Park police officers monitoring a protest near 116th and Quivira arrested 4 people. Prior to the protest, the Overland Park Police Department held conversations with both the protest organizers and residents living near the expected protest area. The department also received information that there may be counter-protests during the planned protest. Beginning at about 8 p.m. on Friday, approximately 30 people gathered at Johnson County Community College and made their way south on Quivira and into a nearby residential area. To ensure both the safety of protesters and the residents who live in the area, 2 Overland Park bicycle officers escorted the group. Throughout the protest, many protesters were acting peacefully, staying on the public sidewalk and off the street and private property. However, some protesters were repeatedly instructed to return to the sidewalk and did not do so. Overland Park Municipal Code requires that when there is a sidewalk available, pedestrians walk on the sidewalk and not the street. Additional police officers responded to the area. Some were wearing tactical gear, including helmets with radios, which provide officers a better ability to block out noise and communicate in loud situations. Police officers at the protest were given the option to remove name badges, but were required to continue to wear uniforms identifying themselves as Overland Park police officers. This option was temporarily allowed in order to protect police officers from recent local doxing concerns. 3 of the people arrested were charged in Overland Park Municipal Court and released early Saturday. During the protests and arrests, an Overland Park police officer was injured, suffering scrapes and bruises to their knee. A 4th person was charged with battery of a law enforcement officer in the Johnson County District Court on Saturday and released. Following the arrests, the protesters left the residential area, returning to the area of College and Quivira. This is a quote from the police chief. "My department is committed to the safety of our great city," said Overland Park Police Chief Frank Donchez. "Overland Park welcomes a variety of voices through safe protesting. We must work together to ensure all voices are heard." Neither Overland Park nor the police department restricted cell phone coverage during the event, as has been stated publicly. Overland Park does not have the technology nor the authority to do so. The uncut body camera videos below show 2 officers' viewpoints of the protests and provide additional context for the arrests that were made. It should be noted that while the Overland Park Police Department's response only mentioned tactical gear in terms of helmets, they were also holding riot shields as well. We can actually see that in one of the body cam clips. In that letter, there are 2 links. One of them is a link to the description of the Overland Park Municipal Code that essentially says that pedestrians need to stay on the sidewalk whenever available or move to the farthest right side of the road when walking. Another is a link to a story written by the Kansas City Star about Quentin Lucas's effort to criminalize the doxing of police officers.
The response from the Overland Park Police Department has been criticized now by the ACLU in a letter of concern that you will actually hear right now.
Dear Chief Donchez, we are writing on behalf of the Miller Dream LLC to express our concerns about the Overland Park Police Department's excessive militarized response to a peaceful protest that took place on July 24th, 2020. We have received reports that your department responded to the protest in riot gear, authorized officers to withhold their badge numbers and other identifying information, and targeted protest leaders with harassment and arrest. This conduct raises serious constitutional concerns and undermines community trust. For the reasons outlined below, we ask that you provide a timely response to our records requests and meet with us at your earliest convenience. Number 1. Factual Background. The Miller Dream LLC has been holding weekly protests against police brutality throughout the Kansas City metro area since early June 2020. This includes a July 11th march in Overland Park. These protests have been uniformly peaceful and required minimal police presence. For instance, your department dispatched only 2 squad cars to Miller Dream's July 11th Overland Park protest. Your officers acted as escorts during the July 11th protest and helped block traffic for protesters who elected to march in the streets. OPPD's interactions with protesters were reportedly cooperative throughout the July 11th action, and the only contentious behavior came from residents who were angered by the protesters' message. Due to their overall positive experience on July 11th, Miller Dream organized another march in Overland Park along the same route and through the same neighborhood for July 24th. The day of the protest, Overland Park's public safety director contacted Miller Dream organizer Patrick Wartruba and asked whether the group had invited armed protesters to attend the evening's march. Mr. Wardruba explained that they had not invited any armed groups and protesters had never brought weapons to any of their past actions. Miller Dream began their protest at the Johnson County Community College campus at or about 6 p.m. OPPD officers approached Miller Dream's organizers and asked them about their action plan. When organizers explained to them that they intended to march along the same route that they used on July 11th, OPPD officers told the organizers that it was important for them to stay on the sidewalk despite having helped block traffic on the same streets during the July 11th march. The organizers responded that they intended to march in the street if they had enough people. At or around 8 p.m., protesters began marching from JCCC towards a residential neighborhood. At or around 8:50 p.m., two residents came out of their homes and yelled at the protesters to leave the neighborhood. One of the residents physically accosted a teenage girl who was attempting to de-escalate an argument between the resident and a protester. There were several OPPD officers located across the street from the resident's home when protesters arrived, but they did not intervene when the residents confronted the protesters. Several minutes after the protesters encountered the angry residents, approximately 30 officers wearing shields and other riot gear began following the protesters on foot. The officers had zip ties in hand and began telling protesters who were marching in the streets to move to the sidewalk. OPPD officers repeated this command even though there were no vehicles in the street other than the cars that were associated with the march. Once the officers got closer to the protests, individuals who had been marching in the streets began to disperse. Stacy Shaw, who was coordinating legal observers, remained in the street in order to help the observers get in position to document the approaching officers. Ms. Shaw was wearing a vest that said attorney and was clearly in the street to help gather information about the police response. Even though there were a number of protesters still in the street, Ms. Shaw was the first person arrested. Indeed, OPPD officers bypassed other protesters in order to arrest Ms. Shaw. She was not the only individual in an apparent leadership role that the OPPD officers targeted. We received multiple reports that your department singled out the chant leader and an organizer holding a bullhorn, threatening them with arrest if they did not move to the sidewalk more quickly. OPPD officers ultimately arrested 3 protesters for violating Municipal Code 1204-068, which prohibits walking in the street where the use of sidewalk is practicable. Legal observers were unable to identify the officers who made the arrest as none of the officers were wearing badges. Additionally, arresting officers refused to respond to legal observer inquiries for their identifying information. Over the last 2 weeks, OPPD has defended its decision to deploy dozens of officers in riot gear to a peaceful protest. On July 27th, you called Mr. Wardruba and told him that your department needed to display such force because you had heard rumors that 2 warring groups with guns were planning to show up at the protest. On or about August 5th, the Director of Public Safety told Mr. Wardruba that riot gear was worn because OPPD had received angry complaints from residents following the Miller Dreams July 11th protest. You've also doubled down on the decision to authorize officers policing the protest to hide their badge numbers. This decision to permit officers to withhold identification was only for the July 24th protest, and purportedly motivated by concerns of doxing. However, it is unclear why OPPD believed individuals attending the July 24th protest posed a unique doxing threat. Number 2. Legal policy and concerns. Part A. OPPD's response to the July 24th protest runs afoul of the First Amendment. OPPD's response to the July 24th protest raises several First Amendment concerns. Although this list is not exhaustive, these examples raise concerns about the constitutionality of OPPD's response to future protests organized by Miller Dream and other members of the Black Lives Matter movement. First, OPPD seem to have selectively enforced restrictions on street protests. Public streets are traditionally public fora, and have immemorially been held in trust for the use of the public and, time out of mind, have been used for purposes of assembly, communicating thoughts between citizens, and discussing public questions. While OPPD is permitted to enforce facially neutral street ordinances, it must do so in an even-handed manner. OPPD's decision to enforce the ordinance on July 24th, but not on July 11th, strongly suggests a reason for enforcement unrelated to public safety. Second, OPPD's decision to target protest leaders raises a question of unconstitutional retaliation. Targeting particular individuals for arrest because they are running a protest runs afoul of the First Amendment. Finally, any decision to engage in more aggressive policing tactics in response to a protest because that particular protest might draw negative community response is antithetical to the First Amendment. The government cannot impose additional restrictions on protests based on the controversial nature of the message or likelihood the event will draw demonstrators with opposing viewpoints. Accordingly, your department's increased presence on July 24th cannot be justified by Overland Park residents' angry response to Miller Dream's past marches. Part B. The use of riot gear was inappropriate and counterproductive to maintaining a peaceful environment where protesters could exercise their rights. Responding to peaceful protests in riot gear can have a chilling effect on the rights of protesters to lawfully assemble and voice their message. When you sent a large number of officers to the July 24th protests dressed in this manner, zip ties in hand, it delivered a message to the protesters that the officers were there to arrest and punish, rather than protect and serve. This protest activity on July 24th was nonviolent and similar to prior protests organized by Miller Dream, with the exception of an interaction between protesters and some local Overland Park residents who wanted the protest to end. This single interaction simply does not merit 20 officers responding in riot gear ready to arrest lawful protesters. Responding in riot gear can also increase the risk of violent clashes between protesters and the police. Scholars have noted that the escalated force model, where police make a dominant show of force through various response tactics, including wearing riot gear, to force compliance with their orders, often amplifies conflict with protesters and instigates violence. Studies have also shown that access to millerized equipment, including riot gear, increases officers' tendency to use military tactics to resolve conflicts. For this reason, former President Obama's task force on 21st century policing recommended that police should minimize the appearance that they are part of a military operation and avoid using provocative tactics and equipment that undermine civilian trust. This is especially important given your department's stated commitment to de-escalate civilian police encounters. Part C. Suspending OPPD's policy requiring officers to provide their names and badge numbers is inconsistent with the department's stated values of transparency and accountability. We were also disappointed to learn that you temporarily suspended OPPD's policy requiring officers to provide their names and badge numbers as part of their uniforms in advance of the July 24th Miller Dream protest. OPPD's officer identification policy recognizes that wearing a nameplate and badge number is an important component of transparency and accountability between law enforcement and the community they serve. Officers should not be permitted to remain anonymous when interacting with the public. Doing so signals that the officer believes he or she may act with impunity and without the risk of being held accountable for any misconduct. Although we are sympathetic to concerns about officers' personal information, such as their home addresses being shared publicly, this concern does not justify your decision to suspend, temporarily or otherwise, the officer identification policy in advance of the July 24th Miller Dream protest. These policies exist for a reason and should not be suspended in advance of policing activities where transparency and accountability matter most, including protest response. Part D. Targeting organizers and lawyers within the protest group for arrests chills protected speech activity. Finally, OPPD arrested 4 individuals during the July 24th protest, each of whom was a clear leader of the event or identifiable as an attorney legal observer. Although we understand Overland Park's municipal ordinance prohibits walking in the streets when the sidewalk is available, the selective enforcement of this ordinance against protesters raises suspicion that the OPPD's tactics were a deliberate attempt to chill speech and shut down the protest activity in response to students' complaints. This is especially true considering that the OPPD had allowed, and indeed supported, marching in the streets during the previous Miller Dream protests. Overall, OPPD's response to the July 24th protest represented a turn towards aggressive police tactics that had not been present at prior protests. This abrupt shift in response leaves organizers in the dark about how OPPD will respond to future protests and what they can expect from OPPD regarding their own safety and protection from harm while engaging in legal First Amendment protected activity.
So lawyers certainly are detailed, aren't they? That was...
Definitely have to be in this kind of situation.
That was a lot, but let's see if we can make out the main claims from the letter of concern. One of the primary concerns is that protest leaders were targeted specifically in terms of enforcing this ordinance. Another is that previously the Miller Dream had been allowed to walk in the street without the ordinance being enforced, but they did specifically for the July 24th protests. Another is that the use of riot gear was not justified. And the fourth is that the doxing concerns that were used in order to prevent officers from being required to give their names and badge numbers were also unjustified.
So for a previous protest put on by the Miller Dream LLC, you can see in their live stream that they've put out that they are marching in the street with no concern given from the police.
So that would support the claim that previously there were not issues with the ordinance and protesters. The July 11th protests were held in the same location as the July 24th protest, in which the Overland Park Police Department did arrest people. So moving on, this next video shows an interaction between Miller Dream organizers and the Overland Park Police Department, in which a few officers talked to organizers about not staying in the street and making sure that traffic continues to flow.
Okay, yeah, I get that.
If the people, they decide, hey, this is what we want to do. Our thing is, as long as we keep it peaceful and there's no destruction of property and things like that type, that's unacceptable to us. But as far as they want to make a statement loud and clear, if they do want to move out of the street and we're able to accommodate that, that's something that we do take a chance with.
Okay, and just to make sure that I'm on the same page with you. Do you guys already have a route that you want to go?
Yeah.
You're not going to be walking on Quivira, like in the middle of the street on Quivira.
Well, it depends on the crowd. If not, then we'll take sidewalks down to where we're going.
Okay.
And to the residential neighborhoods, and then we'll take the streets.
Okay. So the message that I was asked to relay is that we just need to be able to keep regular traffic. We want to have you guys do your protest, and we want it to be done safely, but we also need regular traffic to move. So if that becomes an issue, then we'll come back and kind of readdress it, because our intent is not to get in the way, and it's not to arrest anybody. It's just to make sure that everybody is safe. Okay? All right, cool.
All right.
I think that's all I want to touch on.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is, please do your thing tonight, and we just can't have anybody in the street is all. So, if people get in the street, then we'll have to ask you to get out of the street.
Okay. Well, we do take preventive measures as long as we have those discussions with the people.
Sure.
Okay.
At the crowd, if we can accommodate it, we make sure try not to disrupt.
And I know that you guys can't control everybody that shows up. We get that. We do. But if you can just let the other folks know, and then I know that's really about as much as you can do.
Yeah.
Right? So, well, we appreciate it. We appreciate you guys.
Anytime.
You guys be safe tonight, okay?
This next video we're going to show you is coming from the Miller Dream LLC's Facebook live stream that shows the police asking the protesters to move onto the sidewalk.
Out of the roadway, please.
Can you tell us the law? Please identify yourself.
Need you on the sidewalk, please. For law.
It's not a law, it's city ordinance.
So this would appear to support the police's claims that they were telling protesters to move onto the sidewalk, and the protesters did not. So let's take a look at why the protesters may not have returned to the sidewalk. This next clip comes from one of the organizers at the Miller Dream, Patrick Wetruba, who you may remember from the ACLU's letter of concern. We interviewed him on August 21st ahead of another rally that the Miller Dream was holding. This next clip is Patrick explaining why it is that the Miller Dream has been marching in the street.
Well, we're in a space now where we're kind of just writing our own path. We're not following their directions, and it's civil disobedience throughout our protest and march now, because that's the point that we feel we had to take it to get the change. We tried the peaceful route, the sidewalk route, and we're ignored.
Right.
But now we're getting people attention. Now we have congressmen calling us, and chief of police calling us, wanting to know what it is that we want changed in the system. So
Patrick goes on to say, you can't tell oppressed people how to get their message out about being oppressed. And that goes back to the point of why the protesters chose not to go back on the sidewalk, but this is not the only reason why.
This next clip shows an interaction between protesters and people living in the neighborhoods in which the Miller Dream was marching on July 24th.
We're not in your yard.
We're going to keep this peaceful. The police
Look at the hate. Look at the hate.
No one is on your property.
Hey, no.
On your property. We need it.
Come on, keep it moving. Keep it moving. Come on. It's a distraction. Hey, keep your hands off of her. You gonna keep your hands off of her. Come on. Don't.
Right here, we need legal observers. Thank you. Keep moving.
Come on. Nobody's on your property. Nobody's on the property. It's a distraction.
So those are a few reasons why the Miller Dream has continued to march in the street, although I will note that on the protest that we actually attended, they made sure that everyone involved stayed on the sidewalk.
Yes, the police made sure that was stated multiple times.
The police made sure, and as did the organizers. It was very much, stay on the sidewalk, please.
The organizers made sure to also equip the protesters for what may come later that night, making sure all of the people were staying safe. And I think that was their goal, was to keep it peaceful and safe for everyone.
That definitely seems like it may have been a reaction to the July 24th incident.
Yes.
And so after that interaction with the neighbors, the Overland Park Police Department started making arrests. Now, the very first person arrested was Stacy Shaw, who is an attorney and activist working with the Miller Dream. At the time of her arrest, she was talking to observers. Now, for those of you who don't know what observers are, they are essentially people who keep track of how many people are there, what people's names and phone numbers are, at what point people arrive. They're not a part of the protest. They're there for legal reasons. So in this next clip, we can see when Stacy was arrested. If you'll remember the ACLU's letter of concern, it stated that the police officers bypassed multiple other people in order to arrest Stacy specifically. This next clip is from the Miller Dream's Facebook live stream on July 24th.
Hey!
This is a peaceful protest and you're disturbing the peace.
As you can see now, police start making arrests and protesters begin to go onto the sidewalk, but some do remain on the street.
This next clip is from the August 21st rally that we covered in the Campus Ledger. Marissa talked to the protesters about July 24th, in which she and Darien were both arrested.
The day I married Darien was the happiest day of my life. July 24th, 2020, on the other hand, was probably the worst. Darien and I left the house that night expecting another peaceful march in Overland Park. And let me tell you, what happened that night was absolutely terrifying. Police were on the streets with riot gear within just 5 minutes of the moment the first foot hit the sidewalk. When it became clear that we were grossly outnumbered, Darien and I formed a shield to help a woman and her children get into a car to move to safety. We explained to the officers that we would get to the sidewalk as soon as the children and their mother were safely inside of the car. However, that wasn't fast enough for the Overland Park Police Department, because as we were getting onto the sidewalk, I felt myself being ripped back into the street. I was thrown into a police car, snatched up and flung across the hood. 4 officers surrounded me and began pulling my arms so far behind my back that pain shot through them. I started to have a panic attack. Full disclosure, and without going into too many details, I'm a survivor of sexual assault. So to be in that kind of situation, a situation where I had no control over my body or what happened to it, it took me right back to that feeling many women know all too well. That's what Darien saw in my eyes as I started to cry. That's what he heard in my voice when I called out for him. It is that primal fear that drove him to run to my side.
As you heard in the audio from Marissa, she touches on a topic that is very hard to open up about, but is very necessary to discuss.
This also provides more context for Darien's actions. These next 2 clips come from the Overland Park Police Department's body cams, and we can see that they appear to support Marissa's account of events.
Come on, guys. We need to get out of the street.
We need to get the kids in the car, all right?
Okay, then let's get them in the car. Come on.
Why are you touching him?
Hey, get a supervisor down here, 216.
Why is he touching him?
Come on, guys. Let's get the kids in the car and let's get out of the street, okay? Okay. No.
I need to know why they're doing this. I need to know why they're doing this. No, I need to know why they're doing this.
Okay, guys, seriously. Get out of the street. Come on. Okay?
You
guys need to get out of the street, okay?
This is ridiculous.
No, actually, I'm not.
Yes, you are.
Guys, we're not having this conversation.
We are right now.
We
What's
just
your
need you
badge
to get
number?
out of the street.
You're
That's
telling me
it.
that I can't walk down the street.
This is the cop who will not give me his badge number.
Okay.
No, you were
You guys
required
need
by
to get
law
out of
to
the
tell me
street
your
or
badge
you're
As
number.
soon as
gonna
that
be
kid
arrested,
gets in the
okay?
car, I will move down the street.
Okay. Well, then let's put the kid in the car.
I don't have the kid
Don't
right.
touch nobody. Don't touch nobody. Oh, they won't give us their badge numbers. Oh, look, they're unmarked. They're unidentified.
You in the car? No, this is yours? All right.
I'm going to take it.
Thank you, Mom.
And you guys did absolutely nothing about that. Are you on my shoe? Hey, he is not on. Hey, stop! Get the camera! Get the camera! Harassment!
Don't move. Turn around. You don't want to listen, and this is what happens.
Get on the sidewalk. I was getting on the
Oh, no. No, we're done.
the sidewalk.
You're arrested, okay? I understand that. You've been told that.
Stop moving.
Street, okay? Make your feet so it doesn't get broken, okay?
This next footage is of Darien's arrest. It's unclear what kind of contact was made with the officer in question, but it does appear as though contact was made, but that's all we can really see. We're going to play each clip at its normal speed and then slow it down to try to make out what happened a little further.
Watch out! Why are you in riot gear? 54.
On September 25th, Darien will be tried for battery against a law enforcement officer.
This is a very serious charge. If Darien is found guilty, he will be a registered felon.
As some of you may know, having a felony on your record can affect a lot of different things, such as future employment, being denied housing, and potentially losing your voting rights. And it seems as though there is a lot of inconsistency from the Overland Park Police Department.
And as the letter from the ACLU stated, it's difficult to know what exactly protesters' rights are now because of the Overland Park's inconsistent actions.
Yeah.
And that's why we need answers from the Overland Park Police Department about why these tactics occurred on the 24th and not the 11th. We hope that if you, the listener, have taken away anything from this, it's that Darien wasn't just trying to stop his wife from being arrested. It's a lot more complex than that.
There's much more to the story that needs to be told, and we're hoping we could do that for you today.
We're going to continue covering Darien's trial as it begins, and we hope to give you updates on that.
On behalf of Jason and I and the Campus Ledger here at JCCC, we really do appreciate you listening today.
Now, if we can change tones for a little bit, we at the Campus Ledger want you. So this is the very first episode of this podcast, and we would like to use this podcast as an opportunity to talk about the successes of JCCC students without needing to write a whole article about it. So if you are a current or former JUCO student, reach out to me. My email is jyearou1@jccc.edu. All right, that about wraps it up. Anything else you want to say, Mena?
No, I think that's it. Again, thank you so much, and we hope you tune in next time.
And have a good and safe day.